Okay, so this is a video continuation of last week's lecture. We're going to just pick up right where we left off, which was disk backups. So let's talk about disk backups and how they differ from some of the other things we talked about in the lecture, which was RAID arrays. Again, one of the things I want you to remember is that what we talked about last week in the lecture, RAID arrays are not a substitute for a backup. A backup is really defined as a copy of separate data or a copy of the same data on separate volumes or separate physical medium. So let's talk about the ways where we can, some of the concepts of disk backups and how Windows plays or tries to fill that role. So one of the best ways to make sure that you do not lose valuable information on a hard disk is to fully back up that information on a regular basis. So these backups can be performed from a server on the network. We can perform them locally, we can perform them to a NAS. So there's a bunch of different ways or backup methods that we can use. Performing backups from a device installed on the server has several advantages. So this would be no extra load is produced on the network. Performing backups on a multiple server network provides more assurance that OS and key file settings, including registries, back up. So this would be like backing up a device or backing up to a USB hard drive or to another internal device. We could also potentially back up data to a network backup. So the advantages here would be backup jobs can be stored on a single backup media, and then one administrator can be responsible for backing up multiple servers. So this is actually typically how you see it in most environments is you have all your servers, and then you have a server that's designated as a backup server, and that's where all of your backup data would live. So for example, in my environment, I've got 20 virtual machines, and those 20 virtual machines all get backed up to a single server. The main disadvantage of this, of course, though, is that there's an increase on network traffic. So it's important to make sure that when you plan your backups, if you're backing up over the network, you are doing it in at such a time where network traffic is low. Typically, this is nights and weekends, such that you don't interact with interfere with the day-to-day network activities. So Windows Server actually has a utility that helps with backups. It's called Windows Server Backup. And this tool offers the ability to back up all server files or files that have changed. So it's relatively robust. Windows Server Backup is actually available in Server 2012 and I think Server 2018 too. Features in Windows Server 2016 or Windows Server Backup. So it offers both full and incremental backups. It has more backup options, including something called the Volume Shadow Copy service, which we'll talk about in a little more detail here in a second. It offers reliable data restoration, so it's pretty quick and easy to restore your data from a backup with this tool. It provides information about disk space. It offers other tools like the WB-admin command line tool, and then it has full support for backup to optical media. Now that's obviously not recommended. Optical media would be like a CD or a DVD. The average backup, I would say, can range anywhere from a couple gigabytes to up to a terabyte. So you can imagine with a 700 megabyte CD, how many CDs you'd need to back up. It's quite a few. So while there's support for it, it's definitely not recommended. So there's a few considerations that you should have or that you should take into account when you're performing a Windows backup using the Windows Server Backup tool. The tool only backs up NTFS volumes, so if you have a FAT32 formatted volume, you won't be able to back it up using this tool. It does not back up to tape. So for those of you that don't know, tape drives are they are basically like think about like a VHS tape. It's the same sort of magnetic stripe technology. We can actually back up data directly to what's effectively a VHS tape. And believe it or not, they do store a lot of data. And the advantage of those is that they are pretty cheap and easy to swap in and out if you need to. So they can make for a good offsite backup. But Windows Server Backup doesn't back up to tape volume, so keep that in mind. Also, you cannot restore backups made from a pre-Windows Server 2008 OS that uses ntbackup.exe. So this might be like archive financial records. You might have documents that were backed up long ago with Windows Server backup from Windows Server 2008 OSs. You can't restore those using the Windows Server backup tool. However, you can download the ntbackup.exe file from Microsoft's website, and you can run it on Windows Server 2016 to restore files from backups made from pre-Windows Server 2008 server systems. So in your book, the first step to installing Windows Server Backup is shown in Activity 7-8. It's pretty straightforward to go through and install. We're not going to go through it through this lecture, but take a look at Activity 7-8 and you'll be able to see how to go through and install Windows Server Backup. So we introduced the concept of full and incremental backups in a previous slide, but let's delve a little bit more into what each one of those is. So a full backup is a backup of the entire system, including all the system files, programs, and data files. It basically takes a backup of all of the system's files regardless of if the archive bit has been set. So it backs up everything no matter what. So it changes the file's archive bit to show that it's been backed up, so it sets all the archive bits back to 0. And typically full backups, they take up the most amount of data. So picture you have a 100 gigabyte virtual machine running, and you take a full backup of it. Well, what's going to happen is it's going to write 100 gigabytes worth of data, more or less, to a backup drive. So as you might imagine, that might take up time, and it's going to take up space on your backup server. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're setting full backups, is that they take the most time, and they also take the most space. Incremental backups, on the other hand, they only back up files that are new or that have been updated. So basically what happens is when a file gets changed, that archive bit gets changed from off to on, and then the incremental backup comes in and it only backs up files that have that archive bit marked as on. So the incremental backups do rely on a full backup in order to function. So a typical backup scheme, if we were to look at a full week, might start on Monday night, and we might take a full backup on Monday. And then on Tuesday night, we might take a incremental backup. So the reason we would take an incremental backup on Tuesday night is because all of the, Monday might be Monday morning. So actually, let's change this a little bit. This might make more sense if we start on Sunday here. Okay, so let's go back. So this is Sunday. We might take our full backup on Sunday. And the reason we would take our full backup on Sunday is because in most offices, especially in this example, most offices wouldn't be functioning during Sunday because it's the weekend. Or if they were, typically, depending on the business, there would be fewer people working because it's a Sunday. So we would take a full backup because network performance would be impacted less. And full backups, again, take longer because they're backing everything up. So then Monday rolls around, and it's Monday night, and it's 6 p.m., so everyone's left. And then what we might do is we might take an incremental backup. And so what an incremental backup is going to do is it's going to look at all the files that have changed between the full backup and the incremental backup, and then it's going to back up just those files. So this would be for the 24 hours that have elapsed since the backup on Sunday. The incremental backup would capture all of the files that have been modified. So as you might imagine, because we're not backing up everything, we're only backing up a small amount of data, or the data that's changed, that backup is going to be relatively quick. And this could differ, again, depending on your environment, but typically the incremental backup's really quick. So one thing to keep in mind with an incremental backup, however, is that incremental backups require a full backup in order to function. So let's say Tuesday rolls around and we take another incremental backup. So again, keep in mind, incremental backups only back up files that are new or that have been updated. And that should really say updated since the last backup. So in the middle of Monday and Tuesday, another incremental backup is going to run, and that's only going to take into account the data that's changed between Monday and Tuesday. So let's say that I have a backup, or I have a file that I need to restore from Monday. What I could do is I could restore just the file on Monday here. However, let's say that file's been created. That file was created on Tuesday or on Monday, and then modified on Tuesday, and then it's Wednesday now, and I need to get Monday's version of the file. Well, what I need to do is I would need to restore the full backup, then I'd need to restore Monday's backup. And then let's back up again. Let's say in another example, I needed to restore Tuesday's backup. I would have to restore the full backup, Monday's incremental backup, and then Tuesday's incremental backup. So basically what happens with incremental backups is we create sort of a chain that occurs or that happens between the last full backup and each incremental backup. And if you don't have all the backups in the chain correct, then you can run into issues with being able to restore specific files for specific days. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're using incremental backups in general, is that you sort of create this chain between the full backup and each incremental backup, and you need all the backups in the chain to function. There is another type of backup that's not listed here. It's called a differential backup, and the differential backup solves this problem by keeping track of files that have changed since the last full backup. So I'll let you go ahead and research that one on your own, but differential backups, while they take up more space than in incremental backup, they don't take as much space as a full backup. And so for a lot of backup utilities, differential backups are what you'll see. So moving on, you can also create a custom backup in there's a custom backup option, and this enables you to configure backups differently for each volume. So you can do a file by file backup so that you only backup files, specific drives, folders, or subfolders. So this can be really useful in shaping your backup. If you don't need the full system image, or if you don't need the full all the data, then you can back up just specific subsections of data. So I would say this is pretty useful in that you can reduce your backup size and make the backup complete quicker. So like any good tool, Windows Server Backup includes a scheduling tool. So this allows you to automatically start backups after regular work hours or at specific times of the day. So again, keep in mind when you're scheduling your backups, there is a performance hit. So you want to schedule it for times that occur after regular working hours, typically. The general steps that illustrate how to create and schedule a backup, they're outlined on page 316 of your textbook. So I'll let you go and take a look at that. So just briefly, this is a screenshot from the backup schedule wizard. Specifically, this is showing you how you can specify a time for a backup to complete. You can get pretty granular with this, so you could set up multiple backup times in a day. So again, I'll let you go through and look at that activity in your book that describes how to go through and specify a backup time. But this is a pretty good example of how you can get pretty granular with setting backups. So there's a setting that allows you to configure backup performance options, and this enables you to specify the speed of the backup and whether to perform a full backup or an incremental backup. And remember, full backups typically take a lot longer to complete than incremental backups do, but full backups back up everything, so they give you a more comprehensive backup, so that in the event that your whole system goes down, you should be able to restore, whereas an incremental backup wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. It's important to note that the default is always set to full backups. But to save time on your backups, you could use a incremental backup or a combination of a full and an incremental backup. So just something to keep in mind when you're going through and configuring your options. Again, there's no one right answer to this. This is all a case-by-case basis. So you'll have to figure out when your backups should be completed based upon the performance you need, because again, there is a performance hit when you do them. And then you should also figure out how quickly do your backups need to be completed. Do you need them to complete within 10 minutes? Do you need them to complete within an hour? Do you have the hardware capable of completing them in that amount of time? So all things to consider when you're shaping a backup strategy. Also, Activity 7-10 shows you how to configure backup performance. So take a second, go look in your textbook, and give 7-10 a look here. So now that we have these backups, let's talk about what happens when something goes awry and you need to recover or restore from a backup. So the Windows Server Backup tool enables you to recover any of the following. So you can recover files, folders, you could recover entire volumes, you can recover applications and application data, the backup catalog, which is the information in the backup, and you can actually recover the operating system to the same computer or to another computer using identical hardware. So it does allow you to recover quite a bit of things using the Windows Server Backup tool. So it can be quite robust in terms of performing a restoration. So before you start performing a recovery, there's some things that you need to consider. So first off, determine the date of the backup from which to recover. So typically this will be the previous night, but this could vary depending on what you're trying to back up or restore. So let's say a user comes to you and they're like, hey, I deleted a file. I know it was there last week, but I'm not sure exactly when. You wouldn't necessarily restore last night's backup. You might go back a week and see if that file's there. Or heck, you could even you might even run into a situation where a user's like, hey, I modified a particular folder or a file. I've been working on it all week and I need you to give me last Thursday's version. So they might give you the exact date that they need, and then you could restore to a specific version of a particular file. So take into account the date of the backup from which you want to recover, because you'll be seeing quite a few of them. Also, think about what type of recovery you're going to run. So are you going to back up, are you going to restore just files and folders? Are you going to restore applications, or do you need to restore the entirety of the operating system or hard disk? So depending on which what the scenario is, you might choose one or the other. So for example, if a user came to me and said, I need you to recover a file from last Thursday, I'm not going to restore the whole operating system from last Thursday. I'm just going to restore the specific folder or file. And Windows Server Backup allows you to do that. You also need to take into account what to recover. So this kind of ties in with the previous bullet point. If a user goes and says, or comes to you and says, hey, I need a specific file, again, you're not going to restore the entire operating system. You're just going to restore the specific file. You also need to think about where to recover that data. So when you go through the restoration process, you have the option to restore a file, but you could restore it to a different location, or you could restore it to the original location. Now keep in mind, when you restore it to the original location, if there's a file name that's in there that is the same, it's going to overwrite that file. So you want to really take into account like where you want to recover it. Typically what I do with files and folders is I will restore them to an alternate location. and then give the user the link to that alternate location and allow them to move the files and folders they need back where they needed to go. But again, depending on the type of backup, or excuse me, the type of recovery you're doing, that may differ. You can use the Windows Server Backup tool to perform a recovery of data. So they not only give you the ability to back it up, but you can also restore using the same tool. And it's actually pretty robust, as we'll see on the next slide. So this is figure 7-23 from your textbook. Basically, when you go through a recovery process, just like most things in Windows, there is a wizard. It's called the recovery wizard. And we'll see here that it allows us to select a backup date. So we can figure out, out of this month of backups, which backup date do I want to restore to? We can select a recovery type. So this is like a full, restoring the full operating system, restoring just the files and folders, things like that. We can select the specific items to recover. So if we wanted to restore one specific file or folder, this would allow us to go in and do that. There's some recovery options too. So again, restoring it to a specific location or overwriting the data that's there. And then it gives you a confirmation as well. So again, there's a section in your book that goes through and talks about restoring data. So go ahead and give that a look. So let's go ahead and just briefly sum up what this lecture and the previous lecture in class were. So first off, Windows Server 2016 uses basic and dynamic disks. Dynamic disk can be configured as simple, spanned, striped, mirrored, and RAID 5 volumes. Again, this is what we call software RAID. If you need to recover space from a basic or dynamic disks, you can actually dynamically shrink the volume. So this is really useful in virtual environments. The disk management tool enables you to create basic disks and dynamic disks. Typically, when you're working with disks at all in Windows, you'll be using the disk management tool. For optimum disk performance, plan to schedule regularly defragments on a regular defragment disks on a server. You can use that using you can do that using the defrag utility. Again, keeping in mind that solid state drives should not be defragged. And in fact, I don't think Windows Server will allow you to. You can use the disk check and check disk tools to find and repair disk problems. And again, this is a spinning platter utility. It doesn't apply for solid state drives. Again, RAID provides fault tolerance for hard disks. That's redundant array of independent disks. And what I want to stress there, just on a final note here, is fault tolerance. So fault tolerance is the ability to sustain damage to one or more individual hard disks or hardware devices and allow the system to continue functioning while the technician replaces them. What it is not is a backup solution. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this lecture, it's that RAID does not provide backups, despite the fact that some RAID levels copy or create copies of the data. It's not a backup. You want your data to typically be on a physically separate storage medium, and physically separated from the live data. So if there's one thing I want you to take from this is your golden rule for this lecture. RAID is not a backup solution. RAID is a fault tolerance solution. So on the note of RAID levels, we have several different RAID levels. We've got RAID level 0, which is disk striping. This gives us a lot of advantages like performance, but it doesn't give us any sort of redundancy, hence the RAID level 0, or not real RAID. With disk mirroring or duplexing, that's RAID level 1. The same data is written to a partition on each of the two disks included in the mirror. So this is RAID level 1. Again, it's a mirror. RAID level 5, data is written across a minimum of 3 disks, and it does this via something called a parity bit. And this RAID level is typically called striping plus parity. With storage spaces, it enables you to create storage pools containing different types of storage technologies. For example, we could combine SATA, SSDs, USB drives in the same pool. There are 3 RAID-like resiliency types, which are offered through storage spaces. We've got simple, mirrored, and parity, so very similar to RAID level 0, RAID level 1, and RAID level 5. And then new to Windows Server 2016, Storage Space Direct makes it even easier to add and access storage spaces, especially targeted for virtual machines. So again, Storage Spaces is a software-ready utility that Microsoft has. And finally here, multipath input-output or multipath I/O extends your options for creating fault-tolerant storage solutions through redundant paths. This allows us to specify different paths for our storage area networks or SAN devices. So this is something that you typically see in high availability environments. Windows Server Backup, we just talked about this. It offers you features such as the ability to schedule backups, perform full or incremental backups, and you can also recover data easily from backups. And with that, that is the end of your lecture. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving holiday. If you have any questions about anything that I've gone over on this, please post to the discussion boards. Thank you. Bye.